welcome to Whose Turn Is It Anyway, a podcast all about our gaming group and of course board games. I'm James Davey, your current first player, and I'm joined by other player, Ian.
Hello!
To talk about FlickFleet. In this podcast, it's a little expansion pack, and we're going to talk about a self-published game, FlickFleet. It's a really fun dexterity flicking game for 2 players, and soon to be 4 players, but we'll talk about that later. The basic premise is you flick these little acrylic pieces around, shaped like ships. Once in position, you can shoot, which is put a dice out on top of the ship, flick at other ships. Things explode, things happen, depending on what abilities your ships have and what is on the board. Real fun, dexterity, simplistic at its core, quite complex in its actions game. And we've got the developers Paul Wilcox and Jackson Pope coming in and having a chat about their little love child, FlickFleet. We've played it and it's an amazing game, so what else can I say? Let's get to it. Alright, so we're joined with Jack. Do you prefer Jack or Jackson?
I don't mind.
You don't mind. So we're joined with Jack and Paul, developers of FlickFleet. It's got a couple of questions to ask. So how did you guys become involved in the tabletop gaming industry? Like, what was the inspiration and what brought you forward for it?
That's a question for me, and you'll see why in a moment. So I used to make little bits of computer games. My background's in software engineering. And I went down to play. I've been playing games since I was a kid, and I went down to play a game with some friends, and it lasted literally all weekend. It was like, this is ridiculous. I cannot spend a whole weekend playing games. This was before I had kids. I mean, now obviously I can't play entire weekend games. And I thought I could make a game that's a bit like this, but you could play it in a sensible amount of time, like an hour and a half. And that led to my first board game design, which I came up with I think I was working on it, actively developing it between 2002 and 2004. Then it went in a Tupperware box and sat on a shelf for a couple of years. And then I moved to York. And I thought, no, it's silly. I've got this this finished game sat in a box on my shelf. I should do something with it. So I decided I was going to try and self-publish it, just like a little handmade run of like 100 copies or something. I reckoned I could probably sell 50, but I'd do 100 to get the costs down. And I arranged a playtesting evening in a pub function room and invited all the people who went to the local board games club. And Paul was one of those people. So Paul and some of his friends came along. We spent the evening playing Bordereivers. And at the end of it, Paul and a few of his friends placed orders for the game, which didn't currently exist, which was very encouraging. And Paul later invited me to join his weekly games night. So I started going to Paul's house once or twice a week.
Twice,
which I did for many years. So we've known each other since 2006, which is 16 years now.
Nice.
Which reminds me, I need to update the Gamefound page because I copied it from one of the earlier Kickstarter pages. And it says, we've been friends for 14 years. No, it's 16 years now. So that turned into my first publishing company, which ran from 2006 to 2011, and Paul was one of my core playtesters throughout that time.
What games did you get to the table quite a lot then? What were your favourite games to pull out in your games?
I remember a lot of Alhambra. We used to play Cartagena.
Power Grid.
Yeah, one that begins with M by some German guy. Building walls.
Die Mauer.
What's it called? Mauer?
Die Mauer.
No, Mauerbauer.
No, Mauerbauer, yeah.
That's the one.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Yeah,
I still have that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, this is
It's going back a bit, isn't it, now? So
Stone Age?
Yeah.
Did we play that together?
Yeah.
Vaguely remember that. In theory, Paul and I get together every 3 or 4 months. Either my family goes down to York or his family comes up to Newcastle, because we now live 100 miles apart rather than a mile and a half apart. But what with COVID and everything, that hasn't happened that much in the last few years.
No.
So when we do get together, it tends to be FlickFleet related. But hopefully we will start reinstituting that. We shall see.
Yeah, we try to introduce each other to new games when we do get together more casually. Yeah. So I've got Hadrian's Wall waiting to teach you when we next get together.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, and Furnace, I think. Furnace will be another one I think you'll enjoy.
Very cool.
Lots to look forward to then.
Yeah. So you kind of answered some of our other questions, which is how long did you know each other? So yeah, you've covered that. But how did the Eurydice Games come into fruition?
So in 2011, when I wound up my first company, having lost a chunk of money, I said never again. And then 3 months later, I had an idea for a board game. So I started designing games almost immediately. That sort of poodled on in 2013, I think, as part of National Games Design Month, Academia. I started on a design that turned into Zombology, which was a semi-cooperative card game of crazy scientists trying to cure a zombie apocalypse. Who'd have thought that using things like healing crystals and homeopathy to solve a worldwide pandemic would actually end up as a topical subject? There you go. Just inject bleach, as Donald Trump once said.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
solution for everything. Yeah.
So in the end, I decided I was going to make a small handmade run of Zombology. So I made 200 copies by hand in 2017. But then during that first year, Paul had the idea for FlickFleet. And then we worked on that together. And because Paul's got more free time than I have, he reckoned that he could probably do the manufacturing, or a decent chunk of the manufacturing for this one. So he joined the company. We went from being me as a sole trader in legal terms to it being a limited company with me and Paul as the two directors. And off we went to Kickstarter for our very first FlickFleet Kickstarter in 2018, which I think was November to December, which was an excruciating month.
Is Kickstarter quite awkward to use? Is that why you've gone to Gamefound now?
So the switch to Gamefound was mostly around there was an announcement on, I think it was the end of last year. Kickstarter said, we're going to go to blockchain. And then they did like a 2.5 page press announcement that basically just said blockchain.
NFTs, blockchain.
Like,
yeah.
You provided no actual benefits to anyone except yourselves there.
Yeah.
And obviously, blockchain, I mean, Bitcoin is a particularly egregious example, but blockchain is terrible for the environment. So we were unhappy with that. So we told them that. And just after that, Gamefound came out with a press announcement saying, we're going to be doing crowdfunding. And here are all the things we're working on to make it better for creators. And here are all the things we're going to be working on to make it better for backers. It's like, well, that sounds much better. So we'd already used Gamefound as a pledge manager for 3 of our campaigns. So it was a natural place to go once they opened up the beta to people who were as tiny as us. So I think at the point we joined, I think none of their campaigns had raised less than like $500,000 or something crazy. It's like, I'll tell you now, we're going to raise less than $500,000 when our Xeno Wars campaign goes live on Independence Day. Prove me wrong, but I put good money on the fact that we're going to come in under $500,000.
Way under. Yeah.
Well, who knows?
Yeah, who knows? You guys spend a lot of time, well, Paul spends a lot of time, I guess, with quality control. I watched the YouTube video of you going through every cube. It's quite an arduous thing, I bet, but it shows you guys are passionate about your project.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, that's kind of one of our key motivators for doing this, because we are doing it absolutely the hardest way imaginable, making it all ourselves. But I've tried to explain it before, but the fact that we've now sold just over 1,000 copies of the base game, and I know that I have manually made every single acrylic ship in all of those 1,000 copies, that I have checked and handled every single wooden component and quality controlled everything in every one of those 1,000 boxes, that brings me a huge amount of satisfaction and pride, and that kind of makes it all worth doing, really, and the fact that people around the world are enjoying that. So
yeah, I mean, that
fantastic.
really came across in those videos as well. Like, just it wasn't just lip service. You could really tell that you had that passion for the quality of the product that you were putting out, and I think that just really comes across. And certainly from the sets that we've played with, like, everything is always perfect. I mean, and now it's easy to see why now that we've seen those videos.
Yeah, that's lovely to hear. Actually,
What Paul hasn't said is we've also sold over 1,000 of the 3 different expansions when you put them all together, and 2 of those are much bigger than the base game. So he's done a staggering amount of work making 2,000 boxes worth of FlickFleet in the last 4 years.
Yeah. I am looking forward to making Xeno Wars, partly because it's back to just being 2 colours of acrylic again, because the Box of Flicks 2 expansion, I think we were up to, in total with different thicknesses and different colours, I think it was about 13 different sets of acrylic, which just is a lot to keep track of all the time. So going back down to 2, that'll be fun. So.
Keep it simple.
Yeah. So you're upping the player count to 2 to 4 as well, yeah? With the new...
Yeah, so Xeno Wars is a standalone expansion, so you can play it as a 2-player game. If you just buy the Xeno Wars box, it's a game in and of itself.
Okay.
But if you combine it with the base game, then you've got enough ships and different factions and the bits you need to play a 2 to 4 player game using any of the 4 factions in those 2.
So I'd say we've introduced a turn order mechanic where whichever faction gets shot at the most, they will rise in the turn order for the next round. So it kind of balances out that everyone pile on the vulnerable ship. It kind of fixes that problem fairly well. So
yeah, I was wondering how initiative would work, but I'm guessing that sorts that problem out.
Yeah, it seems to work pretty well, actually. I mean, we have made it so if you have the Box of Flicks 2 expansion, you can actually play with 5 players.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I find that
pirate faction.
Yeah, I find that a little bit too chaotic for my taste, I will be honest. But it's pure chaos. But 4 is really good fun.
That's something we really enjoyed about FlickFleet was the simplicity, but also complexity. It's got enough like meat behind it so that you can have some strategy about what you're doing. But then it's also you can teach it in 5 minutes or something.
Oh, I mean, the first time you showed me how to play, I mean, the teach was like 5 minutes, and we still had our first game done within 15-20 minutes. It was the basic principles were very simple and easy to pick up, but then it quickly uncovered these layers of, oh, okay, but now what about this? Now what about this? And now we've added these ships, and now I'm flicking mines and trying not to blow up my own ships, and which I did several times.
Yeah. One of the things that was really satisfying about the UK Games Expo was that when we had a crowd, you could see people had learnt how to play just by watching other people play for a few minutes, and then were very keen to have a go themselves. And that was really awesome. You know, you can learn it that easily. And just to address the other thing you said, that we've really liked from the get-go that it starts off as a very simple game, but the tactical complexity develops, you know, as the rounds go on, quite quickly to, like, for saying you've only got those 2 actions, but they have to be different ones. And the order in which you activate the ships is important. You know, the order in which you do the 2 actions becomes critical. And it becomes a much more challenging game, as it sounds like you've discovered, because you've only got those 2 actions for each ship each turn. With the Box of Flicks 1, which I think is in a way one of the harder expansions, the ships in that are phenomenal, but you don't understand why they're phenomenal until you've played a heck of a lot, and then they kind of make more sense. That's like a bit layered odd, depth. Really. Yeah. And I'd like to say that was intentional, but it really wasn't.
But no, definitely, I think you're right. Like the fact that someone can almost learn the game just by watching it, that's a huge testament to how well designed the mechanics are. We've already talked quite a bit about the in-depth of FlickFleet, but I kind of wanted to ask, what was the genesis of that idea originally? Where did the idea for the game come from, and how was that sort of early stage of development? How did it go from, I think, flicking wooden bits of fruit around in the early days? Tell us a bit about that.
Well, on one of our regular get-togethers, Jack and I had stayed up quite late playing Flick 'em Up, the Western-themed dexterity game, which I was so bad at, it was unbelievable. But we really liked it. But then the next day we went for a walk in a National Trust property with our families, and to avoid our childcare responsibilities, we kind of engrossed in a conversation. And I said, oh, wouldn't it be really cool if someone made like a science fiction dexterity game where you flick spaceships around and flick dice off them as weapons? And Jack was like, yeah, someone should do that. And then, you know, we had a very, 3-hour conversation in which we fleshed out how that would work, what it would look like, what the mechanics would be, what it would feel like, what we'd want it to feel like, and that was great. And then a few months later, Jack had produced a prototype using, I think it was like Early Learning Centre food items. So we had like a.
I think my eldest.
I remember there was a tomato being a fighter wing.
3 at this time, something like that, and we had a load of. I think actually it was. I think it was IKEA, like kids' toy food, and so it was like 5 mil MDF, and there was like slices of bread and slices of ham and slices of cheese and burgers and buns, and so you could play food with this like 5 mil printed MDF. And I thought, well, I don't have any ships, but it's probably enough to try it out. And my sister-in-law and her husband were visiting, and I sort of said, Matt, can you try a game out with me? He said, yeah, right. So I grabbed a couple of sheets of paper, hastily scribbled some dashboards on them with pencils, grabbed a dice and a die, and I was like, we need something flat that we can flick. There you go, tomato, pepper, yeah, a couple of slices of bread, sorted. So, and the ridiculous thing was, even with that, it was good fun. It was like, there's definitely something here. I spoke to a fairly local company who did laser cutting. I found someone who could laser cut acrylic. They did me a couple of offcuts. My first attempt at them was like way too small. They were tiny little things. It's like, I'm never going to be able to hit that. But then it turned out that one of my friends who was running a playtesting group in Newcastle with me, he just started at university and had access to a laser cutter in the lab he was in. So he offered to do some laser cutting for me. So I bought some acrylic. He cut some ships for me, and off we went. And I've in my game publishing career, which now I think spans 6 games, not all of which I've designed, it was the one that came together the fastest. It was just, there's something there. Oh, just need to tweak that a bit, change that. And within probably 6 to 9 months, we had a working game, and it hasn't changed a huge amount. Certainly from then, and probably even from that first idea that Paul had.
I would say it's completely recognisable from that initial conversation. The game has ended up being exactly how we described it, and it plays how we wanted a game to play. We designed the game we wanted to play, and that's what we've ended up with.
I think it just is testament to it, isn't it? Is the fact that if it was that much fun to play and it caught that quickly when you had tomatoes and bread and cheese, then it's only going to get better when there's a bit of theme wrapped around it properly as well.
Yeah, the core concept is there, and it's a solid one. What was the decision to self-publish, though? Because that must have been a hard thing to go forward with and actually do. Like, there must be quite a few pitfalls that you come across.
So publishing ourselves, but not necessarily manufacturing ourselves. So I already, as I mentioned earlier, I was already running Eurydice Games at that point as a self-publishing thing for Zombology. So I was keen to do it through that. Mm-hmm. The tricky thing with manufacturing is because we've got even in the base game, there's 3 different types of capital ships. There's 2 different types of wings that those capital ships can launch during the game. So there's I think when you include the different shapes involved in the fighter wings, the bomber wings, and those, it's something like 9 different shapes that you need to make. Now, if you laser cut those, you set it up once and you say, cut me some of those, and you can cut 1 copy of those or 10,000 copies of those, and it just takes time. Whereas if you want to go to professional manufacturing, you need 9 different molds. And with injection molding, the mold is very, very expensive. And then the injection molded parts are usually very, very cheap. So there's a point at which it makes sense. And when we priced it up, it was going to be something like 2,500 copies. And with my first company, which didn't quite fold, but I wound it up losing some money, I had been in the position where I had, I think, over 1,000 games in a warehouse just around the corner from my house. And I was paying £10 a week plus VAT to warehouse those, and I was just watching the cash I had in the company dwindle because sales were below the warehousing fees, and I did not want to end up in that situation again. So we looked into it and we worked out that if we did it ourselves, as long as we got the laser cutter, and that's what our first Kickstarter was for was to buy the laser cutter because we didn't own a laser cutter. We worked out that we could do a print run of 200 copies and just about make it affordable. As it turns out, that first print run was 400 copies, 250 of which I think were sold through the first Kickstarter. The second Kickstarter reprinted that and added the first expansion. The third added another expansion. The fourth reprinted those three and added a fourth expansion. And we're going to a Gamefound in 2 weeks' time for the fifth expansion.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Paul's garage is just filling up. It's going to be overflowing.
Paul's entire house is filling up.
I was going to say, I wish it was just the garage. Yeah.
So does Mrs. Paul.
Yeah. But the decision was, I guess, born of necessity because we realised that any alternative manufacturing method, i.e. injection moulding, it was just at a scale we didn't feel comfortable trying to hit. And when Jack brought me on board, because we've been friends for, at that point, 14 years, we had long discussions about, well, how are we going to do this? And we came up with 3 ground rules, which are, as long as it doesn't, the business doesn't damage our friendship, as long as we're not having to invest a ton of our own money, and thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, that we're both enjoying what we're doing, then it's worth doing. And we do every couple of months just check we're still on board with all those 3 points.
Yeah, it's quite good value to uphold, really. That's going to keep your company morale high.
Yeah. But I mean, the other side of manufacturing it ourselves is I think as we've probably demonstrated, the pride and satisfaction we take in making it, that's kind of paramount for me now, I think. And that if we were having it made for us, we may lose that control. And I don't know how that would work for us. I don't know if that would still be fun. I don't know.
Yeah.
Paul has previously described us both as control enthusiasts, which is clearly a euphemism.
Yeah, I was trying to think of the nice way to make that comment because I can relate. I think I would feel exactly the same if it was it's my baby, if it was my creation. Of course you're going to want to.
If you lose that agency, sometimes it could kill the passion or could kill what you originally wanted for the game, which you definitely don't want.
Yeah, and it's interesting, I think, because we're very aware that the game has accrued quite a following. A small, modest one, but quite a loyal one. And it's been an interesting journey. But, I mean, I know some people are a bit frustrated that we've never kind of fleshed out the lore of FlickFleet, if you like, kind of the backstory. And we've quite consciously not done that because we don't want to kind of bound the imagination of the players or, possibly stray a bit too close to intellectual property and get sued by Disney or something. But I think with Box of Flicks 2, where we actually invited fans to come up with ideas and things they'd like to play with, I think if we'd had said if we'd gone a bit kind of this is the universe, this is how everything works, we may not have had some of the ideas that they did come up with that were amazing and things we'd never have thought of. So I think keeping it loose has actually been quite good. So in that instance, we're not control enthusiasts.
There's a big round ship you had to make, wasn't there? The number 13 or 16?
Option 13.
Option 13.
Yeah, that started as a joke because the campaign blew up. It was much more successful than we wanted it to be honest. But we kept having to add stretch goals. And on the Kickstarter page, when Jack was filling in the announcements, getting our backers to vote on the next stretch goal, there'd be like option 1, option 2, option 3. And you'd overwrite the option 1 with, I don't know, uprising cruiser or option 2, pirate gunboats. But for some reason, Jack left option 13 and just didn't realise it was there. So when we posted the poll, one of the options appeared to be this mystery option 13. So of course that's the one nothing. So of course loads of people went for that one, and it became a bit of a joke. So I came up with kind of I guess it's a bit Death Star adjacent, but But the deluxe version had etching on 2 sides, which we're never ever doing again. It was insanely complicated to manufacture.
I bet that took some time.
It did, really did, and it's a lot of acrylic as well with that. But obviously we had to create rules for that and a dashboard and make it work, which was really good fun actually.
Mid-campaign.
But it is a bit, mid-campaign, But it is quite a cool looking thing.
Yeah.
So, but that was kind of our fan service, really. That one.
And why not? Have you come across many pitfalls, like any hurdles and problems you've come across? Or?
Yeah. Oh God, yes.
A few. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. The main ones for me are storage. Like I said, when we started, we had grey and red acrylic. So I had 2 big stacks of each sheet is roughly A3 sized. We now have like significantly more than 2 different types of acrylic, so they all need to be stored. When the first print run, we took leave of our senses for a while and we handmade all the boxes, which Jack spent. I think you got it down to about 22 minutes a box to make. Yeah, but that was a lot of work. So second time round, at 22 minutes each. So by the time we got around to the next campaign, it was like, actually, let's get these made. But as with all these things, there's an economy of scale, and there's a tipping point at which it's worth doing. And to make the boxes affordable, that tipping point, the minimum is 400 copies. So we order boxes in multiples of 400, which is fine until the lorry turns up at your front door. with like 1,600 boxes.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that you then need to persuade your wife will fit in our house discreetly somewhere. Honest.
Did you tell her beforehand though? Yeah. Did you say there's a big lorry coming up and we're storing this much acrylic?
I did. I don't think either of us quite grasped what it'd be like, and certainly with the last one, when the acrylic lorry turned up with a pallet mover and dumped pallets of acrylic on the drive, and when the pallet mover withdrew, the pallet actually collapsed under the weight of the acrylic. And then it's like, we've got to carry all this in the house and put it somewhere. That was not my best day, but
it's like 300 kilograms, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, cool. It was a lot of acrylic. Yeah. And then there's the usual issues of it's kind of like that, having the work-life balance. I think when you're working in your own garage on a project you're passionate about, it's easy to let that slip a little bit. You know, and suddenly my daughter's 18 when I'm sure she was 4 last time I looked, that kind of thing. So not quite that bad.
It sounds like maybe your wife can remind you of that when appropriate, though, right?
I'm choosing it. It's on her, that one. You have to. But reminding yourself to take breaks is important. And then the big one was I guess I got a little bit complacent with the laser cutter and I destroyed it. It caught fire, and luckily, there was a bit of smoke damage to the garage. But other than that, I managed to extinguish it bore it caught anything else. But that wasn't
a fit of rage then, was it? It was
no, sadly not. It was just a mistake. I did what I'd always done, and then just didn't do one of the last processes, which is remove the thing I've cut from the bed as I switch it off. So I didn't do that, and then didn't see that obviously the laser had set fire to something in the bed of the laser cutter, and then leaving the cut acrylic sheet on acted as fuel, basically. So it was only when smoke started pouring out of the extraction hose that I realised something's not right.
Quite lucky it didn't go any worse than, really. Yeah?
Yeah, I think, yes, I wake up in a cold sweat worrying about that, but as a result I've adjusted my protocols, and and it cost us £4,000, and I guess in total about 6 months production, because it was about 4 months to get a new one, and then we had a few issues with the installation and running of it to start with, so it slowed us down a bit.
It's pretty good.
That will never happen again, I hope.
Laser cutters, don't set them on fire.
Yeah,
it's a top tip for anyone looking to get into laser cutting.
It's very common to do though. It's very easy to do.
No, I bet.
And it's usually because you do get complacent, or you cut a material you're not used to cutting. So someone was telling me they've actually destroyed 3 through fire, and one is if you just cut normal wood, if there's like a little pocket of sap and the laser hits it, it can explode. Of course, part of me is now really wanting to try that, but I know I mustn't do that. But
you just have to go outside with it.
You see what I'm working with here, gents.
Does Paul keep pushing for getting the second laser cutter so that he can do all his experiments?
Yeah, in the spare.
Yeah.
So with all of those various challenges and fires amongst other things that you've had along the way, if you could change one thing about how the development and journey to release a FlickFleet went, what would be the one thing that you would change, or are you 100% happy and have no regrets whatsoever?
I think personally, if you were to ask me, it would probably be... So when we started the company, we had almost no money in the company. We had a tiny mailing list. The only product we'd made up until then was Zombology, which at that point had maybe sold 80 copies or something. And we went to Kickstarter hoping to raise, was it £12,000, Paul? I think it was.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, that was utterly crazy, and I can't believe we pulled it off. Because we literally had no marketing budget. We didn't run any ads, didn't do anything. We sent an email to my mailing list and then crossed our fingers and had the most uncomfortable month imaginable. We had a £12,000 target, and we achieved that with not in 7 minutes, not in 4 hours, but with 4 hours to spare of a 30-day campaign. So you can imagine how excruciating that month was. Oh God, it was so stressful.
Hands shaking towards the end.
Lots
It
of
was
mashing
really,
the refresh
really
button those
unpleasant.
last few hours.
So thankfully, the second, third, fourth campaigns have all been much more successful than that, and each one has done better than the last one. And because we were successful the first time, we were able to spend a little bit of money on a marketing budget. And then for the second one, we spent a bit more, and the third one, we spent a bit more. Plus, of course, our mailing list has grown each time, and the number of fans of the game has grown each time, so it has become easier. But yeah, that first campaign was just deeply, deeply unpleasant. So I think we were 101% funded come the end. The target was £12,000. We raised £12,127. And then 2% of people's cards were declined. And so we actually ended up with 99% funded.
Oh.
So, it was enough.
Yeah.
Because we baked in a little bit of...
it got you off the ground.
Yeah. Got us over the line. But yeah, it was horrible.
How about for you,
That's
Paul?
a good... Yeah, I'm going to say it's a really interesting question. I've been sat listening to Jack thinking, well, if I'm honest, we wouldn't do that long a campaign again if we'd known what the mental turmoil and anguish just having it run for that long would cause. We wouldn't do that, and we certainly haven't done it again and won't ever do that again. 2 weeks is fine. So that's one thing. I agree with Jack on that one. I do wonder in retrospect, knowing what we know now, if we wouldn't ever have handmade the boxes. I think it was by necessity at the time, but it was such a huge drain on the physical time that we had. I actually think we maybe wouldn't. Kind of wish we hadn't done that. Yeah, there's little things. I think we had to rejig the ramming rules because they were overpowered, and that's always felt like a little bit. Just I wish we'd got that right from the start, but it worked for us at the time. But then we didn't realise people would kind of game the rules in the way they did, rather than it. We'd always intended it to be a thematic, absolute last ditch manoeuvre.
People always try and min-max though, don't they? So they all try and bend the rules or try and get as most out of it as possible.
I mean, I'm pretty sure you rammed me at least 3 times last night.
Yeah, but I had the ram shit.
Primary way of killing me.
Well, yeah.
It was really good fun, that one, actually. It was really good. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it less, but it was fun for you.
But the version of the ramming rules that's coming in Xeno Wars is the definitive retroactive rules, which is how I think they should always have been if we'd thought about it differently originally. So that's kind of been my 3 things. I'd like to say there's something about the shipping process, but I can't think what I would actually change. It just is what it is, but it's my least favourite part of the whole process.
It's hard for everything at the moment with shipping, isn't it? This is the problem.
Yeah.
Kind of on a UK scale.
Yeah, but it's so time consuming, and I don't know, it feels like some of the packages we send off, you're just kind of hoping they get where you've sent them to, but But
you just have to accept that there's going to be a percentage of them that either come back or just disappear.
Yeah. Really.
And you've got to resend. So,
but I can imagine that, especially given all of the care and attention that you both put into every single element of every single component in every bag in those boxes, to then have one go astray, or even to come back to you not having reached where you wanted it to go, I can imagine that everyone probably hurts a little bit, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, and we have to pay the shipping again. And often when
That's
they
even
come
more.
back, and often when they come back, you've no idea of why they didn't get there, and trying to find out is often a very long-winded, laborious, and constantly fruitless process. Which I find
you don't just want to send another one and have that come back for the same reason.
Yeah, and especially since Brexit, because the shipping rules are, you've got to have your paperwork absolutely perfect, or it just comes back and it's like, well, in what way is this not perfect? And you'll never get an answer to that question.
Yeah.
It came back.
Asmodee, a big company who should know this, are having problems with stuff getting stopped at the borders. So it's it's one of those, unfortunately. So with your box art, what was the inspiration behind it? And obviously someone else does the box art, or do you help with that, Jack, as well?
So I do almost all the graphic design, but the box art is done by a friend of a friend.
Okay.
One of the guys who was the best man at my wedding used to work, or still does actually work in computer games, but for a while he worked in a computer games company in Sheffield with another guy who was one of the artists there. So he was a computer games artist. And,
it's got a very computer game feel. It's kind of like retro, like kind of 80s aesthetic.
So I'm not sure how because he ended up doing the box art for the second game I did, which was It's Alive back in 2007. He did 2 different boxes for that. He did the box art for Carpe Astra, which was the third game I published. He did the box art for somebody else for a game called Ice Flow, which was a different publisher. But the sort of the slightly cartoony style of his art, I thought would be a really good fit for FlickFleet, and it's now it's very much it is the FlickFleet aesthetic. It's just Rich's art is
it fits it very well. I quite like the finger flicking the other dice at the ship as well. I thought that was a nice little touch. Yeah, it made me smile.
And I think I told him what the game was. I gave him the 5-minute. It's a game where you flick spaceships around and you flick dice from the top of spaceships at other spaceships. And he came up with 3 sketches, and that was our favourite. And it's genius. And works really
it looks
well.
great.
So.
Yeah.
And it's been nice to involve him more as well. So with Xeno Wars, we actually asked him if he could come up with sketches of what the alien species would actually look like, and then kind of his ideas for what the ships could look like. And that then fed into our 2-dimensional design process. And it was really cool having another kind of artistic brain on board to kind of, think it through and, again, bring different ideas to the table. That was really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome to have.
Did he end up doing
the...
Did he end up doing the border for the Hive dashboards? Yeah, because they look different, don't they? Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. Not there's anything wrong with your graphic design, Jack, but it was nice to have...
Well, there's a lot wrong with my graphic design. So a lot of things we do ourselves. Obviously, Paul does all the manufacturing. I do the graphic design. I also do the books, social media and marketing, and all that kind of stuff. And it's not because I'm good at it. In Paul's case, he is actually pretty good at the manufacturing, but in my case, it's because we haven't got the money to pay someone else to do it. We hire an accountant to check that we haven't royally screwed things up before submitting them to HMRC. But other than that, we do everything ourselves just to save money.
Without having that external source there, would you like to bring someone else in, or are you happy just the 2 of you?
I think for FlickFleet's, for the making of FlickFleet, I think we're very happy with the 2 of us.
Yeah.
I think were we to do another game, I'd be tempted if we have the money to get a professional graphic designer or artist involved a bit more. It would be very nice if we had someone who had half an idea what they were doing the marketing and add stuff.
Well, you've done pretty well though.
I've done all right, but it's been flailing around in the dark largely. So any success, I think, is more by luck than judgment. So yeah, I mean, I think those things are things that I do out of necessity, and I don't think I'm good at them, but I think I've scraped by. So
I feel like you're being too hard on yourself, and you've done really well. So I mean,
it
was
is.
word
did
of
I
mouth.
mention? Did I mention we're not going to get $500,000 on this Gamefound campaign?
It is one of the challenges is that you end up wearing a lot of different hats, and we have to support each other in the wearing of those hats as well. So, Jack looks at spreadsheets and he enjoys them. I look at them and something dies inside me. But I have to understand how they work to support Jack and being part of the decision making process that goes into the business side of it. But it can feel quite lonely at times. I mean, one of the things we've tried to do through like Twitter and social media is link in with people who maybe have more experience and possibly skills than us, and try to just politely ask questions and check, are we doing this right? And I mean, the hard and fast one was, we need an accountant. We cannot screw that side of it up. We will get in trouble if we do. Yeah. So obviously Jack had sorted that out before I came on board. But it is, sometimes it's hard to know what to ask. You don't know what you don't know until you discover you don't know it.
I was just going to say, we're quite lucky with FlickFleet that we've got such an engaged fan base, because we can do things like go to the FlickFleet group on Facebook and say, here's some ideas we've got for the dashboards for the new ships. What do you think? And we'll get good ideas come back off that, things to improve. I often do things like, here's a few sketches we've got from the artists for the box. In fact, for the Box of Flicks campaign, we let people vote on which of the options they wanted as the artist. We said to the artist, it's got these crazy things in it, fill your boots, and he came back with 3 cool sketches, and then that went out as a vote in during the Kickstarter campaign for the backers to help us choose the box that they thought would be most attractive, rather than just me or Paul picking one.
Yeah, that's quite a video game concept, though. That's kind of how the design process goes with a lot of early access games and stuff like that. So that's obviously probably from your previous experience has kind of leaked over a little.
I am trained as a software engineer, so there's a lot of feedback loops in that. So it's all about incremental development. You make small changes and get feedback from your customers on what they think. So I guess some of that has bled into the way that we run Eurydice Games.
But that's nice and interactive, though. It's a good way of doing it. But it also leads on to one of my other questions, which is, what advice would you have to someone who's just has a board game idea, wants to get it out there and self-publish themselves?
It's an interesting question, because I suppose I have done a bit of proper self-publishing where you go to a factory and say, make me 1,000 copies of this, or 1,200 copies of this, or whatever. But the vast majority of our experience is making it ourselves. And if you're going to do that, you've got to be absolutely sure you know what you're getting yourself into. Those first 400 copies of FlickFleet took Paul 40 minutes to laser cut, and me 40 minutes to cut out the dashboards, make the boxes, and bag them all up. And so it was a big old chunk of work, and I was doing that in my spare time around a young family and a full-time job. And Paul was doing it around a part-time job and his family. So if that's the route you want to go down, you've got to be fully aware of what you're letting yourself in for. The vast majority of people who decide to self-publish their board games will go to Kickstarter to raise the funds. And if you're successful at that, awesome. You're clearly better than we were at our first attempt at that, because we did, but only just. But then they'll go to a factory in China probably and say, make me 1,000 of these. I don't have any recent experience in that. So, I mean, that would be what most people would do, and I'm not the right person to ask for advice on that. The only thing I will say is you want to be careful of how many copies you get, because the more copies you get, obviously the cost per copy comes down by a lot, but the total cost goes up. But then you've got that number of copies, and if you sold 90% of them, you can probably sell the last 10% through shops and things. But if you sold 20% of them, you've now got 800 or 3,500 copies that you've got to pay to warehouse, and you've got to try and sell through shops and distributors, which is very, very tough. I did it with the first company, but there's like, that was pre-Kickstarter, and there's like thousands more games per year now than there were back then. So trying to get into retail and distribution has got to be way, way harder than it was back then.
Yeah.
Not that I tried.
And Paul's only got so much room in his house that he can let you fill up. So,
Yeah.
There's a limit to how much he can warehouse for you.
Just have to put a tent up in the back garden, place where I can go to, and then I think we should be okay.
That's what happens if Xeno Wars is successful.
In fact, your daughter's about to go to uni, so that's an extra room. There you go.
Yeah,
There you go,
she has made it explicitly clear I am not allowed to use her room in any capacity.
But she's not there. She'll never know.
I know. But just going back to your question, I think you need to really, really do your homework and check it is absolutely the way you want to do it. And I would encourage anyone in that situation to talk to people, much like Jack and I, to see like what are my options, what actually does it involve, and am I happy doing all those elements, or do I need help from other people? Are the bits I don't know how to do, or I just don't want to do? And you've got to do your homework on that front, because there's. And having said that, however well prepared you are, things will come up you haven't foreseen. I think in the last couple of years, kind of the shipping crisis, no one could have foreseen that. But if you're sat with, 2,000 copies of a game in your home with no way of shipping them anywhere because you didn't get your sums right on that point, you've made a big mistake.
I mean, even if you did get your sums right, but the underlying situation has dramatically changed. I was hearing of people last year who had been quoted $1,500 for a shipping container from China to America. They'd run their Kickstarter, they'd charged the customers for shipping, and then gone to the factory, made the game, and then they actually tried to ship the containers, and it's it's $15,000 a container now because of the shipping crisis. It's like all of my numbers up until now were baked in on 1,500, and it's gone up 10 times. Now what do I do?
It's quite a volatile market at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, the way we went has been good because it's protected us from all of that kind of stuff, because we get most of the stuff from the UK. A little bit comes over from Germany. But yeah, I mean, even as Paul says, even if you are getting them made in China or whatever, if you're self-publishing, you're the sales person, you're the marketing person, you're the business administration person, you're the accountant, you're the manufacturing consultant, you're the art director. You've got to do all those jobs or pay someone to do them for you. The route we've chosen is unusual and a bit crazy, but it does allow us to fit in the gap between the sort of, I mean, if you go to China, you're almost certainly looking at a minimum order of 1,000 copies. Might be able to get away with maybe 500 if you're lucky. But we can make a print run of 200 or 400 because we make them ourselves, and we can be fairly confident that we're going to sell all of those 200 or 400 because the Kickstarter sells 250 or 300 of them, and then we've got ways to get rid of the last few.
And another interesting issue, I think, is that you've got to be careful that what you want to do is what you end up doing. And I'm aware there's been quite a few people who really their passion is game design and creation, who end up then getting stuck with feeling like the manufacturing or the publishing becomes a full-time job, and their passion for the making and creating kind of gets squeezed out. I mean, that is something we
definitely sounds like a
full-time
times. Job.
Yeah,
sounds like you've also had to learn a lot of new skills in through that process as well. So
absolutely,
yeah. I mean, I'd never even I didn't know laser cutters existed till I discovered I'm going to need to learn how to use one. So that was a bit daunting. But I've managed it. Old dog, new tricks, and all that. But
I think it comes across that you're both extremely modest about what you've been able to do so far, which is admirable. But no, clearly you've both acquired or leveraged existing skills to a huge extent to make this project happen. And like I said before, the end product just speaks for itself. It's of such high quality for something that's been self-manufactured and self-published is just pretty incredible. So I'm sure that everyone who's listening who's played the game would agree. And for those of you that haven't, why not? go get a copy now. Help empty out Paul's spare bedroom. Make some room so his daughter can come back on the holidays.
And you've obviously got your Gamefound launch soon as well. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, so Xeno Wars, which is the standalone expansion, so you can play that as a 2-player game, or you can combine it with FlickFleet for up to 4-player games. That introduces 2 new alien species: the Hive, who are organic and will spit parasites at you that take over your ships from the inside. It's deeply, deeply unpleasant. I'll warn you about that now. And the Storm, who are fast and very powerful, but also a little bit fragile. So you've got to be quite careful with them. You've got to nip in, do some damage, and run away again. That's coming to Gamefound on the 4th of July because Independence Day, the aliens are coming. Makes perfect sense. So we're just...
The original FlickFleet game will be available within that campaign as well. So if anyone's missed out on that, they don't have to feel they've missed out on the 3-4 player iteration.
Yeah, so you'll be able to get Xeno Wars, the base game, expansion 1, which adds scenery, asteroids, objective tokens, a civilian fleet for your
the mine layers,
plus mines, cloaking ships, all that kinds of other cool things. Plus, there's a limited supply of the 2 boxes of Flicks, box of Flicks 1 and 2, that will be available during that campaign as well. That's coming.
And
to
they're the big boxes,
those are all the same boxes, so that's 4 identically sized, small but very full boxes. In some cases, very, very full boxes. We are hoping to add a big box. So we're speaking to some Hungarians about laser cutting boxes for us. But that will probably be an add-on that needs to be unlocked because we need to make a certain number of them to be financially viable. So I think the plan is that once we reach a certain backer total, then at that point we'll unlock that as an add-on as well. And you'll be able to hoy all your boxes in a big laser cut box.
Amazing. What could be better?
Yeah, exactly.
But so lots of exciting different mechanics there and new stuff coming with Xeno Wars as well. For each of you, what would you say is your favourite element or mechanic or favourite standout part of FlickFleet for you personally? What's the bit that you just love?
I'll let Paul go first because I know what he's going to say.
Yeah, well, you might not actually. I've been giving this some thought on my drive home today. I actually have 2. The hyperspace Kraken tentacle, that's my absolute favourite. That's a fan created concept that when we read it was like, this is ridiculous, this is insane, and then it was like, but it might work, and then obviously we mocked it up and play tested it and it was like, this is just phenomenal, and we would just never have thought of this. So I love that.
Talk me through this tentacle. How does it work?
Okay, you have 6 little circular numbered discs that you spread around somewhere in the play area, usually around the middle, roughly the circumference of a dinner plate. And at the start of each round, you roll the d6 and you put a purple activation cube on whichever one you rolled the dice for. At the end of the round, these are little rifts in the fabric of space, and your actions in the play area have disturbed the hyperspace Kraken asleep through the tears. But the one that's got the activation cube on it activates when all the ships have had their turns, and the tentacle comes and the bottom of it is a circle that slots over the numbered disc. And it's probably, 4 inches long, I think, just about. And you rotate it 360 degrees, and basically anything it touches, it does an immense amount of damage to, because it's a giant space tentacle.
Amazing.
But also, you can shoot at rift tokens, and if you do, that activates a second or third rift token. So if there's an enemy ship that's wandered a bit too close to a rift token, you might want to shoot that rather than the ship itself.
This sounds a lot like the mine strategy I tried to execute last night.
Trying to shoot the mines.
Yeah.
Unsuccessfully, I should say.
Funny you should mention that, but my other favourite is actually the mines. But for very personal reasons, it was an idea that I think I'd suggested it when we were actually getting near to manufacturing FlickFleet to start with. Like, wouldn't it be cool if? But we spent ages trying to come up with rules that kind of made sense thematically. For how they would work, and when we were getting very close to expansion 1 being ready to go to Kickstarter, we were like, right, Jack came to my house. It's like, right, we've got to nail this down. We've got to find a way to make this work. It's so cool. We've got to have them. We'd even designed how they'd look before we designed how they'd work, which is backwards for us. And then we said, well, what if like we launched them like bomber and fighter wings? You know, you touch, they come onto the play, touching the ship, and you flick them to launch them. And like saying it now, it's so obvious that was the solution, but it honestly took us about 8 months to get there. But we played it, and it was just like, this is amazing. And I just looked at Jack and said, this is more than a game, it's a system. and then we just burst out laughing. But that's one of my favourite moments of working with Jack. It was just like it encapsulated why we do what we do. And the way we do it. So every time I play with the mines, I have that sense of, this isn't a game, it's a system. And it's fantastic. And I actually really like the Mine Blast template piece as well, because it's just such a hefty piece of acrylic. I love it.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Yeah.
It works as well.
Actually, the other cool thing about that was originally, the bit in the middle that you put over the mine was actually cut out. And then,
so you could slot it over the mine.
But my wife pointed out, but that's stupid because obviously it's going to tilt and be uneven. And she's like, you just need the picture in the middle, and anything it sits on, everything's the same thickness. And it was like, oh yeah, she's right.
Yeah. Because then it just sits on the top of everything nicely, doesn't it? See everything is here.
Yeah.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time last night with the mine template.
We did, yeah.
And the beauty as well of the fact that when you shoot a mine, you'll naturally move it a little bit as well, so you can never be quite sure what you're going to blow up.
There's been a few situations like that. So in Box of Flicks 2, there were the both the ECM template and the phase ship. So that's some. So the ECM ship can launch a field that protects other ships. And the phase ship could basically teleport. And in both cases, we were trying to think about all these like complex rules for how that might work. And it's like, you know what we need to do in this situation is flick something. And so the ECM template became, you flick a little token like you do a mine, and where it stops, the shield appears. And the teleport thing became, you flick a little token, and wherever it stops, you can move to if you want. So it's just like, keep it simple. If in doubt, flick something.
Flick it.
So, and my answer to that question, I've spent that whole time trying to think what my answer to that question is. And I think I would probably say two things. Number one, sort of harks back to the very beginning of FlickFleet. So there's a number of scenarios in the base game. One with a big planet, one with an asteroid field before asteroids existed as something we sold. And in both of those cases, there was very much a sort of homebrew, let's just use something from the house feel to it. So we ended up with a bowl or a plate as the planet. So you put a bowl or a plate face down on a table, that's your planet. If you crash into it, you die. And I really like that. And I even found the perfect bowl in IKEA for like £6. Which it's like, I don't know, it's like 15 centimetres or 20 centimetres in diameter, and it's made of bamboo in such a way it looks like it's like almost a perfect hemisphere, and it's made of bamboo and it looks like it's a gas giant because it's got alternating bands that could be clouds around Jupiter or something like that. And the mines, the asteroids, we just use pound coins for. So I really like that sort of, let's just grab something and use it in the game. Aesthetic, but then that leads into the second thing, which is the asteroids. They're just really cool, especially the wedge asteroid, which when you hit it shatters and becomes like the worst possible thing to try and move around because there's now little bits of asteroid that are all over the shop. So asteroids and using random things around the house for FlickFleet for me.
Sounds like there's definitely some like crossover marketing opportunities there. There should be little FlickFleet shelf edges in IKEA next to the bowl. You know, this bowl compatible with FlickFleet.
There you go. That's my next stealth trip to IKEA.
Yeah,
just going to go around just placing FlickFleet sneaky posters near all the things that I think would work in game, including, of course, all of their 5mm thick MDF food slices, tomato, peppers. Sausage
It'd
bread.
be in one of your expansion packs, yeah?
You've got to watch out for that bread coming up the left wing. I mean, it's going to wreak havoc, especially with your tomatoes.
Yeah.
Launch
So I
the
think
lettuce.
finally launch the lettuce.
There you go. That's
So
box of
fine.
Flick 3 sorted.
Yeah, there it is. The fantasy expansion.
Yeah.
The food expansion. And then finally, we had a question from a listener as well. Rich wanted to know what your favourite board games are outside of FlickFleet. If you have time to even consider them other board games these days.
My all-time favourite remains Carcassonne. It's a classic. It's probably the more abstract end of what I enjoy, but it was the first game that kind of sucked me back into board gaming, and I just loved the simplicity of it, and that you can play in a very mean way or a very relaxed, chill way. I just really like that. I mean, I think there were way too many expansions, but
The catapult.
yeah,
Blatantly jumped the shark.
No, that was awful.
I've not played with the catapult one, so
You're a better man for it.
But it's a game I would never say no to.
Yes, yeah. I was talking about Carcassonne the other day and how I haven't had time to get it to the table recently, but it's kind of a staple game of mine as well. So
Yeah.
So funnily enough, I always used to say Carcassonne to that question, and it probably is in my top all-time games. But if I'm honest, I very rarely choose to play Carcassonne anymore. I still think it's an awesome game. I've still got it. Love it. I've introduced my kids to it a bit. So it's probably in my top 3, but it's probably no longer my all-time favourite. I would say probably Race for the Galaxy, and maybe Seven Wonders as well. Especially since in the last almost 10 years of having kids, games at the shorter end of the spectrum have become much more appealing to me.
yeah. Seven Wonders. Do you play with the expansions or just the core one?
This is going to sound ridiculous from a man who is just about to put the 4th expansion for his game on Gamefound, but I'm not really a fan of expansions. I do own leaders and the extra player boards with like Mannequin
Extra
Piss
Wonders.
and the other ones. That's the one for Seven Wonders, but I never play with them. For Race, I own Alien Artifacts and the Gathering Storm and the second one, Rebel Imperium or something like that. And I tend to play with the cards from those to give us a bigger deck to choose from and a wider range of Star Worlds, but I don't play with the extra rules from the expansions. If that makes sense, like the
Because you're a bit
conflict
more
rules.
variability in the game without too much complexity or convolution.
So I tend to find that personally, my personal feeling is that expansions tend to take a very nice game that I find really clean and satisfying and overcomplicate it. Yeah. So I don't mind things that add to. I don't mind a wider range of things, but not necessarily a more complicated game off the back of it, which expansions usually tend to add.
Okay, well that's great. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
And we look forward to flicking some new alien races around or infecting the galaxy with. But
it's just horrible. Ooh.
Yeah.
They quite literally go right through you.
Yeah. Right. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank
you. Take care.
And with that, our final turn is wrapping up and victory points about to be scored. Thanks everyone for listening. If you've enjoyed the show, please like, subscribe and review on your podcast player of choice. If you want to get in contact with the show on our socials, you can. Email us on players@whoseturn.co.uk. Check us out on our Facebook page, Whose Turn Is It Anyway Podcast, or Instagram page @Whose Turn Podcast and TikTok @Whose Turn Is It Anyway. We'll be back again with another episode. So until then, whose turn is it?